Jeremy Corbyn!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to Lord Bhattacharya, who died last week. As she said, he was a champion of the car industry and manufacturing in general and played a key role in saving Jaguar Land Rover, safeguarding jobs, but crucially ensuring international research is done in the UK, and I think we thank him for everything that he did. Tomorrow is International Women's Day, and I'm delighted that from our point of view the debate will be opened by my friend, the Honourable Member for Lewisham East, who herself is the daughter of a Windrush generation, and we will be making the case to close the gender pay gap as our determination to improve the lot of women in our society. And in that vein, Mr. Speaker, can we congratulate the member for Liverpool Waverley Tree on giving birth to a son this morning? I join the House. I join the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker. I join the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, in sending our thoughts and prayers to the families of those that have lost young people. Yusuf Mackay and Joseph Chesney, both 17 years old, and the 9th and 10th teenagers murdered already this year. 285 people have been stabbed to death last year, the highest level ever. I welcome the fact the Prime Minister has announced that COBRA is being convened, but what extra funding is being provided to address the root causes of both knife crime and the increasing levels of violent crime on the streets of all of our towns and cities?
Well, first of all, I'd like to join the right honourable gentleman in congratulating the honourable member for Liverpool Wavertree on the birth of her son. Sure, we're all pleased to hear that that has gone well. Can I also say, in relation to International Women's Day, that I'm very pleased that today marks the launch of the book by his honourable friend, the member for Leeds West, of Women of Westminster, Women Who Changed Politics. I hope that book will be an inspiration to other women to come into politics and see a career in this House. And can I also congratulate the England women's football team, who last night won the She Believes Cup, defeating Japan in doing so. The right honourable gentleman has raised the question specifically of knife crime, which I referred to in my opening comments. Of course, as I said, any death of a young person is a terrible tragedy through an act of violence, and we have seen too many young lives, too many lives of promise and potential being cut short. Responsibility for these terrible crimes does lie with the perpetrators, and we will always stand with the victims to ensure that criminals are brought to justice. But we will only defeat the scourge of violence if we understand and address its complex root causes. Yes, that does mean ensuring that all agencies, including the police, have the right resources and powers to do their jobs. It means tackling the drug crime that is fuelling gang violence in our cities and exporting it across the country, and it means intervening at every stage to turn young people away from violence, and that is exactly what the government is doing.
Mr. Speaker, many of us in this House will have sat in the living rooms of homes where a young person has lost their lives through knife crime, and will never forget that experience and never forget that feeling of hopelessness and loss that those families are going through. We owe it to those families and those young people that lost their lives to do far more about knife crime and far more about ensuring there are sufficient resources for the police to deal with it. Sarah Thornton, the National Chief Police Council, said, and I quote, "We need much stronger leadership from government and there needs to be more funding." The Metropolitan Police Commissioner said yesterday, of course there is some link between violent crime on the streets and police numbers. 21,000 police officers' jobs have been cut. Violent crime is at the highest level since comparative records began. If there are sufficient police numbers, can the Prime Minister please explain why yesterday the Defence Secretary was offering to send in the military to assist with knife crime?
I say to the right honourable gentleman, as the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police has recognised that the causes of knife crime are complex, she said police alone won't sort this issue out. We can't arrest our way out of this problem, and I agree, and that's why we need to tackle it across a number of fronts. Now, we must continue to enforce the laws that bear down on violent crime. That involves the Offensive Weapons Bill, where we've introduced the knife crime prevention orders. Those were asked for by the police, and we're introducing those orders. We'll intervene early to stop young people going down into a life of crime and becoming involved in crime. We've published the Serious Violence Strategy. The Serious Violence Task Force is working. We've also put £200 million into the Youth Endowment Fund, and our Early Intervention Youth Fund has already funded 29 projects working with police and crime commissioners. And we do ensure that police have the right resources. £460 million more money available this year, nearly double that, nearly £1 billion extra available next year. But we also need to ensure that we're understanding the different use and misuse of drugs that is fuelling a lot of this crime. And that's why my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has set up the Independent Drugs Misuse Review, which will be led by Dame Carol Black.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the police clearly do not have the resources to deal with it. Safer neighbourhoods teams have been cut. Community police officers have been cut. Many areas see no police officers at all. There is nobody to supervise these special orders the Prime Minister is talking about. Perhaps she could listen to Nazir Afzal, former Chief Prosecutor of Greater Manchester. Tragically, his 17-year-old relative was recently stabbed to death in Birmingham, and he said this: when you reduce police numbers by 21,000, there isn't the intelligence anymore. There isn't the neighbourhood policing anymore. Does the Prime Minister now regret the cuts in police numbers, and will she undertake that on this review they will be restored to the level they were formerly at?
To the right honourable gentleman, as I've just indicated, we are putting more resources into the police this year. It's no good members on the opposition benches standing up and saying, no, you're not. It is a fact that more money is being put into the police this year, that more money is being put into the police next year. The real question is not, are we putting more money into the police? Because we are. The real question is, why did the Labour Party oppose that money going into the police?
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, violent crime has doubled under the Tories' watch. And I've had a letter from Mike in Gosport where he says, yes, it's important. He's got something to say. The crime rate has run out of control because there is no police presence, adding, it's become a really unsafe town to live in. I think Mike speaks for millions of people around the country. When are towns, such as Gosport and others, going to get the resources they need for the safer neighbourhoods teams they need and the local police they need to tackle rising violent crime and provide the intelligence from which arrests can be made against those that have committed these crimes?
I say to the right honourable gentleman, as we put more resources and make more resources available to police, they're available to forces across the country, including, of course, Hampshire. But can I also say to him that, of course, we look at the powers and the resources that the police need. That's why we are not just putting more resources in, but increasing the powers that the police have. We introduced the knife crime prevention orders in the Offensive Weapons Bill. That's an important step we've taken. It's a step we've taken because the police asked us to do this. But if the right honourable gentleman wants the police to be able to do their job on the streets, he needs to answer the question, to tell this House why it was that when we increased the powers of the police, to deal with those who were carrying knives and to put custodial sentences on those who were caught twice carrying knives, the right honourable gentleman voted against it.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Crime went down when Labour was in office. We increased the numbers of police officers and the safer neighbourhoods teams. Police officers telling me there's simply not enough of them to do the job. Hampshire alone has lost 1,000 police officers and their funding has been cut by 70 million. Does the Prime Minister understand the scale of need here? The Local Government Association says local services face a funding gap of £3.2 billion this year. And by the way, that's double in 1 year alone what the Stronger Towns Fund is offering over 7 years. The numbers of rapes, murders and other serious crimes committed by offenders on parole has risen by more than 50% since privatisation of the probation service was introduced 4 years ago. At least one company wrongly classified offenders as low risk in order to meet government targets. Does her government now accept that privatising the probation service to profit-making companies has been a disaster and should be reversed and should be brought back completely into the public service?
I say to the Right Honourable Gentleman, what we want to do is to ensure that when we're working in relation, looking at these issues of probation, that we are actually genuinely reducing the level of reoffending, and that is about a rehabilitation method. That is about a rehabilitation method that looks at a variety of issues, that looks at the question of the home that an individual coming out of prison has, that looks at their employment and looks at their relationship with their family. This is something that wasn't being done fully under the last Labour government. That's why we saw reoffending rates at such a high level, and it's why we need to take action. But he comes back, he keeps raising issues. I think what he's doing, and I welcome the fact that he's accepting that dealing with serious violence, dealing with knife crime, actually requires us to act across a number of areas. So, for example, it is about the work we're doing with young people. It's about supporting intervention in accident and emergency department in hospitals. We're expanding our support to the charity Red Thread, which introduced its youth violence intervention work, now in hospitals in Birmingham and Nottingham as well as in London. And we're supporting the £3.6 million National County Lines Coordination Centre. In just 2 separate weeks of law enforcement action, we have seen more than 1,000 arrests and 1,300 individuals being safeguarded. We commend all those police officers and other agencies involved in that work. The government is giving them the support they need to do their job.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, the problem is that violent crime has doubled. The rise, Mr. Speaker, has been driven by austerity, something the Prime Minister told us a few months ago was over. Cuts to the police, rising poverty. The police and Home Office recognise the link, even if the Prime Minister doesn't. But, Mr. Speaker, the issues are wider. The privatisation of the probation service has been a disaster. Mental health services are under-resourced. Youth and children's services are in crisis. More than 600 youth centres have been closed. 3,500 youth workers have lost their jobs. Funding for colleges and schools has been cut and exclusions are rising. The public services that were there to support young people have been systematically stripped away, and everyone can see the consequences of that. Can the Prime Minister not recognise there has to be a holistic response to this? You cannot keep communities safe on the cheap by cuts and privatisation. You have to invest in all of our communities in every part of this country, something this government is incapable of doing.
We put more money into local authorities. The Right Honourable Gentleman voted against it. We put more money into our police.
Order! A very discordant noise from the opposition backbenches. The question has been asked and, broadly speaking, heard, and the answer will be heard. The Prime Minister.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, we've put more money into our schools. We're putting more money. 2.6 billion over these 2 years. More money into our local authorities, 1.3 billion next year. Voted against by the Right Honourable Gentleman and the Labour Party. More money into our police, nearly £1 billion extra available to them next year. Voted against by the Right Honourable Gentleman and the Labour Party. But you know, the Right Honourable Gentleman stands up here and he talks about austerity. If he's that concerned about austerity, you would think that he would want to make sure that it could never, ever happen again. And let's remember why we had to take those measures, because of the state of the economy left by the Labour Party. But what would his policies mean? Higher borrowing, higher taxes, crashing our economy, less money for our public services. He'd take us right back to austerity square one.